My wife wanted to destroy me with lies and humiliation, but I fought and turned the tables completely. The day began like any other, but the world I knew shattered in minutes. I never imagined the ground could open beneath my feet over something so intimate, so close to home. It was in the silence of the kitchen, when I accidentally picked up Sarah's phone, that my life changed in a way no amount of emotional preparation could handle. Messages, audio messages, laughter from her, talking about me as if I were invisible, useless, just a mechanic. I felt butterflies in my stomach, as if all the air had suddenly been knocked out of my lungs. Anger and pain mingled with a sense of disbelief so intense that I stood still, motionless, remembering every detail of our life together, every moment I believed in her love. It was 2023. I was 38 years old, a workshop I built myself, proud of my work and the respect of the people who always surrounded me. My simple life, my effort, seemed worthless to the one I loved most. I could feel the weight of the phone in my hand. Every vibration of the screen seemed to poke at the open wound in my chest. My breathing became irregular, my hands trembled, and a pang of fear arose. Fear of not being good enough, fear of having been deceived, fear of not being able to pull myself together after this. My name is Marcio. I'm 38 years old, a mechanic, and I've always made a living from what I built with my own hands. I never had much formal education, but I learned to repair engines and understand people with the same care. I've always believed that honesty and dedication were enough, that hard work would bring respect and happiness. My workshop is my refuge, the place where I feel in control of my life. I've always dreamed of a close-knit family, a home full of love and laughter, but I never expected that love could turn into silent humiliation. In the early years of our marriage, Sarah seemed different, affectionate, passionate, curious about my life. I believed our difference in education and social status was an opportunity for growth, not an obstacle. But gradually I noticed subtle changes, looks of contempt, subtle comments about my work, that shame she tried to hide in public. I tried to ignore it, rationalize it, thinking it was her insecurity, but the realization came with the audio recordings. Every laugh, every mocking word corroded my chest like acid, leaving wounds I couldn't touch without feeling pain. That moment I realized that my fight wouldn't just be against her, but against my own feelings of inadequacy, fear and doubt, anger mixed with disbelief, and a profound sense of betrayal. I spent days unable to speak, unable to eat properly, just repeating the words I heard, trying to fit them into some logical framework that made sense. I relived every gesture, every conversation, trying to figure out where I went wrong, if I could have done something differently. But deep down, I knew it wasn't my fault. Her manipulation and that of Mark, that man who seemed tailor-made for everything I wasn't, had swallowed me whole. I remembered when I'd started building the workshop alone, brick by brick, dawn after dawn, dreaming of a dignified and honest life, and I compared it to hers, always seeking glitz and luxury. My body seemed to weigh more and more, backaches, a pressure in my chest that came and went, reminding me that the impact wasn't just emotional, but amid the anger, shock, and sadness, a spark began to emerge. I couldn't let that situation define my entire life. I needed help. I needed to transform pain into action. I needed to fight for what was rightfully mine and for my dignity. That's when I decided to seek out Dr. Henrique, my lawyer. A calm, fair man, he gave me the clarity I couldn't achieve alone. Talking to him was like shining a light in a dark room. Suddenly, I could see the path to struggle, to the courtroom, to exposing the truth. But even with professional guidance, the internal process was more difficult. I was afraid of facing public humiliation, of reliving every detail of what she said, the laughter, the coldness. With every step, I battled my own insecurities. What if I'm not enough? What if no one believes me? What if all this destroys my reputation and my life? Each doubt paralyzed me for seconds that seemed eternal, but something inside me resisted. The sense of justice, the memory of the man I always wanted to be, who always worked hard to support and protect his family. I realized that the only way to emerge from there with my head held high was to face my fear, show the truth, and prove to myself and everyone that dignity cannot be bought with luxury or appearance. For weeks between audio recordings, tests, and meetings, my body felt tense, as if every muscle were compressed. My hands trembled, my heart raced, and I had constant nightmares about her conversations and contemptuous looks. But little by little, I began to notice small victories. Each piece of evidence gathered, each witness who confirmed my character, each step taken in court strengthened me internally. I began writing in my journal, simply to organize my thoughts and emotions, and I noticed that anger, when channeled, could transform into focus and determination. I still felt the pain of betrayal, the emptiness of realizing that the one I loved didn't see me as I saw myself. But that same pain began to teach me something crucial. I'm not defined by the gaze of those who don't value my efforts. I'm not destroyed by the words of those who don't understand my worth. There, at the edge of humiliation and vulnerability, I began to rebuild myself, brick by brick, exactly as I built my workshop, with patience, sweat, and faith in myself. Each day leading up to the trial was a battle. I woke early, still with the bitter taste of betrayal in my mouth, but I felt the need to take a deep breath and organize my thoughts. The workshop became my refuge and my source of strength. Tinkering with engines gave me control when everything else in my life seemed to slip away. I felt the oiliness of the parts on my fingers, the smell of metal and grease, and it reminded me, I built my life alone. No one gave me anything. But along with this strength came anxiety, the fear of facing Sarah in court, the dread of hearing her every word become a weapon against me. At night, alone at home, I remembered the messages, the laughter, and my chest ached as if I'd been punched endlessly. I cried in secret, thinking about how someone you love could become so cruel, so calculating. But it was in that very suffering that I realized something. I could no longer be passive. Humiliation could not be the final chapter of my story. Dr. Henrique was essential in this process. He guided me patiently, explaining each step of the court process, showing me how to gather evidence, how to behave in front of lawyers and witnesses. I felt insecure, but each piece of his guidance gave me a little more courage. I began recording my conversations with Sarah, organizing screenshots and audio, all meticulously. My anger transformed into focus. It wasn't just revenge, it was justice. I needed to show her and everyone that I wasn't worthless, as she called it. There were times when I almost gave up, when shame and fear paralyzed me, but every time I looked at my calloused hands, I remembered every effort, every sleepless night. Building my workshop, and I felt I deserved to fight for respect and dignity. Preparing for the trial took a toll on me physically and emotionally. Constant headaches, sleepless nights, the feeling that the ground could fall apart at any moment. My heart raced every time I thought about facing Sarah and Mark, about exposing everything they'd done. But I also felt a new energy, a strength I hadn't known existed, growing from within. I began to realize that my tears weren't a sign of weakness, but of an awareness that something was deeply wrong and needed to be fixed. I took deep breaths, trying to remind myself of my worth, of the man I'd always been, of the respect I'd earned in my community. Each step was painful, but each step also brought me closer to the truth. I clearly remember the day I organized all the evidence into a folder. I sat on the floor of my living room, surrounded by papers and audio recordings, and felt a mixture of exhaustion and determination that surprised me. My sweaty hands gripped the papers tightly, my heart hammering in my chest, and I realized I could no longer turn back. It was time to face up to this, to show that my life would not be defined by the silent humiliation of someone who didn't respect me. I knew it would be painful, that every word in court would bring back memories I wanted to forget, but I also knew it was necessary. For the first time in weeks, I felt a strange clarity. I could win, not with aggression, but with truth. And the day of the trial finally arrived. I woke up early, feeling a mix of nervousness, anxiety, and a strange sense of control. I put on the shirt I always thought made me feel more confident, took a deep breath, and walked to the courthouse. Each step felt heavy but firm. I could feel the city's gaze on me, the expectation of those who know my story, even if only from the streets around the workshop. When I saw Sarah, the initial shock was inevitable. The coldness in her gaze, the certainty that she would still try to manipulate everything. But something had changed in me. I was no longer that insecure man who cried alone with his cell phone in his hand. I was ready to stand up, to show that dignity, work, and honesty are worth more than any luxury or lie. The courtroom was larger than I'd imagined, and the silence that reigned as I entered sent a chill down my spine. Every glance seemed to weigh me down, but I took a deep breath and remembered my calloused hands, the workshop I'd built alone, the effort of a lifetime. I couldn't back down. When the first pieces of evidence began to be played, my body trembled. Hearing Sarah's audio of me talking about me as if I were useless, laughing at my every gesture, was like reliving a nightmare in slow motion. My throat tightened, my stomach churned, and I wanted to run away. But something inside me screamed to stay, to face the truth head on. The shame she'd projected onto me for years was about to be reversed. Every word of hers, the one I'd heard with pain, was now exposed under the light of justice, and I could feel for the first time that I wasn't alone in this struggle. Mark stood there, trying to appear confident, but I could see the insecurity in his eyes. The difference between us was never just material, it was visceral. My life was built on effort and dignity, his on manipulation and superficial charm. As Dr. Henrique led the presentation of the evidence, I felt relief mixed with suppressed anger. The anger wasn't meant to destroy them, but to strengthen my purpose, to prove that I had value, that my work, my life, and my honesty were no less important than any luxury or lie. Each detail revealed was like bricks being stacked in my internal reconstruction. I was being recognized for the truth, for who I truly am. Feeling this, even amidst the pain, gave me a power I hadn't felt in years. Sarah's words, when questioned in court, cut me like blades, but they also showed me the depth of her own fragility. She tried to deny, soften, manipulate her impressions, but the audio spoke louder. Each laugh of hers, which I had heard so often as pain, now became an instrument of justice. I could feel my body relax a little, the tension in my shoulders lessen. Even so, the pain of seeing someone I loved so deeply exposed to public shame was intense. My eyes filled with tears, not of sadness, but of a mixture of relief and catharsis. Finally, the truth was being revealed, and I no longer had to carry the burden of silent humiliation. When the judge finally spoke, confirming the value of my work, my honesty, and the injustice I had suffered, I felt a wave of emotion course through my entire body. My knees trembled, my breathing quickened, and I had to lean back in my chair. It was as if, in an instant, all the years of struggle, every tear, every night of doubt, every fear of not being enough, were recognized and made worthwhile. I had never imagined that someone could understand the depth of my pain and acknowledge my efforts so concretely. The entire courtroom seemed to breathe with me, and I realized that, for the first time, I felt proud of the man I am, even with all the emotional scars I carry. I left the courthouse exhausted, my body heavy, but with a sense of emotional lightness I hadn't felt in years. Every step I took outside the building seemed to reaffirm my regained dignity. The anger and pain were still there, but now they were fuel, not a prison. I could feel my muscles relax, my breathing even out. The memory of the audios and her words no longer paralyzed me, but reminded me of the path I'd walked. And in that moment, I realized something fundamental. Overcoming pain isn't about the absence of pain, but rather learning to walk with it, transforming suffering into strength and humiliation into recognition of who we truly are. I finally began to understand that my life wouldn't be defined by those who belittled me, but by the man I chose to be, even in the most difficult moments. After the trial, returning to the workshop was like entering a sanctuary. Every tool, every engine, every grease-stained wall seemed to embrace me. I felt a physical relief, as if every tense muscle could finally relax. But the rebuilding wasn't just external. I had to deal with the feeling of betrayal that still burned within me. I had to learn to breathe deeply before reacting to memories, old messages, or curious looks from acquaintances who had somehow learned about the case. I began writing every day, no longer to organize evidence, but to organize emotions. I jotted down anger, sadness, fear, and even small achievements. It was a slow and painful process, but necessary. Some nights I slept only 2 or 3 hours reliving the past, and other nights I woke feeling I could finally breathe without weight. I learned that rebuilding self-esteem isn't a one-time event, but a daily endeavor, where every action, however small, becomes a building block of one's own dignity. I also decided to invest more in the workshop, expand services, and take short courses in new technologies and management. I realized the pain was still there, but focusing on growth gave my life meaning. With each satisfied customer, each engine repaired, I felt my self-esteem strengthen. I made mistakes along the way. I trusted some people too much, spent money without planning, and pushed myself beyond my physical limits. But each setback taught me something about limits, priorities, and confidence. I realized that overcoming doesn't mean the absence of failures, but rather learning from them, adjusting routes, and persisting. Little by little, the fear of not being good enough began to fade. Sarah's memory still loomed, but like a distant shadow, unable to dominate my emotions. Outside of the workshop, I began reconnecting with friends and family I'd neglected out of shame or guilt. These relationships became my support network, reminding me that I didn't have to carry everything alone. I learned to share my feelings without fear of judgment, and this gave me unexpected strength. Some conversations brought tears, others laughter, but all had a cathartic effect. I discovered that human contact, empathy, and the support of people who truly care are fundamental pillars for rebuilding a life. I began to find pleasure in the little things again. Walks at dusk, listening to music, drinking coffee alone on the porch. Each simple gesture was a silent victory against what I'd experienced. The process of emotional reconstruction also required confronting my own thoughts. I needed to identify patterns of insecurity, feelings of inadequacy, and long-standing fears that the situation had intensified. Through therapy and conversations with Dr. Henrique, I understood that the guilt I felt was more about my own self-criticism than any real failure. Anger still surfaced, but I learned to transform it into determination. Each time I felt vulnerable, I took a deep breath, remembered the journey I'd traveled, and mentally repeated that my worth doesn't depend on the approval of those who don't respect me. Little by little, I rebuilt my confidence, learning to trust myself before expecting the world to do the same. And then came the time to look forward, no longer to the past. I began to dream of new projects, of emotional stability, of a life I was proud to live, without needing the validation of those who betrayed me. My body still remembered the stress. My shoulders still carried tension. But there was lightness in the knowledge that I had survived the pain, that I had fought and emerged stronger. The workshop was thriving, my clients trusted me, and I could look in the mirror and see a man of integrity, resilience, and dignity. Overcoming the pain didn't erase the scar of betrayal, but it taught me something much greater, that it is possible to rebuild oneself even when all seems lost, and that the dignity achieved through self-effort is worth more than any luxury or lie anyone can offer. Today, when I stop to reflect on what I experienced, I realize the pain is still there, but it doesn't paralyze me. I can talk about Sarah, about Mark, about the audio recordings, and the humiliation without fear or shame. The court, the public exposure, the stares and comments from the city, everything that seemed unbearable at first is now just part of my story, which has strengthened me. I still feel the tightness in my chest sometimes, remembering how I was deceived, how someone I loved deeply could be so cruel. But at the same time, I feel gratitude. I learned that life isn't defined by what happens to us, but by what we do with what happens to us. Every tear shed, every sleepless night, every ache in my heart has brought me here and allowed me to build something that goes beyond a workshop or a trial. I learned that there is no victory without struggle, and that overcoming adversity is a constant process, not a magical moment. I had to face fear, shame, anger, and loneliness, and each emotion taught me something about myself. I discovered that my worth doesn't depend on the gaze of those who betray me, nor on the status others hold, but rather on the effort, honesty, and dignity I carry with me every day. Today, I can hold my head high and say that I survived, that I fought, and that I earned respect. The physical sensation of this victory is real. My body feels lighter, my shoulders less burdened, my chest more open. But the greatest sensation is emotional, that silent peace that comes from knowing I did everything in my power to be fair to myself. What amazes me most is realizing how small details of everyday life have taken on new meaning. When I walk around the workshop, I feel proud of the dirty floor, the grease-streaked walls, and each piece repaired with dedication. When I receive a satisfied customer, I feel that it's not just work being done, it's respect being earned. I learn to value every gesture, every effort, every silent achievement. I discovered that true wealth lies not in material possessions or appearances, but in dignity, authenticity, and the ability to stand firm in the face of adversity. Every action I took to rebuild my life was a building block for my self-esteem, my confidence, and my self-love. Today, I can look to the future with hope and courage. I know that life will still present challenges. There will still be pain and moments of insecurity. But now I know I can face them. I know that my decisions, my dedication, and my ethics will guide me. The story I've lived has taught me not to run from pain, to face it, to learn from it, and to transform it into strength. I can look in the mirror and recognize myself, without fear, without shame, with pride. I've learned that true victory isn't humiliating those who have wronged us, but conquering ourselves, rebuilding our lives, and finding peace and dignity in the path we choose to follow. If you're going through a similar situation, I want you to know there is a way, even if it seems impossible. Pain doesn't define who you are. Every step, every choice, every action to rebuild yourself is an act of courage. The humiliation may be great, but your strength is greater. You can get up, rebuild, and overcome. I experienced this, felt the ground disappear beneath my feet, but I managed to get back up, rebuild my life, my self-esteem, and my future. The scar remains, but it's proof that I resisted, that I fought, and that I found my dignity, and no one can take that away from you.